If your nervous system feels tired and you're longing for a deeper, more embodied connection with the divine, I'd love to invite you to my free Sacred Intimacy Snapshot. In just a few minutes, you'll discover which area of intimacy in your life is asking for care right now, and you'll receive a gentle 4-part mini course to help you tend to what's next on your journey. You can take it at innerlightcompanion.com. Welcome to the Inner Light Companion, a space to personalize your spiritual journey with the 12 sacred intimacies. I'm Tamara, your companion and guide. Each episode of this podcast explores a facet of connection with the divine, yourself, others, and the world, offering clear markers to recognize, gentle practices to try, and stories that help you grow what's strong and tend to what needs to grow. Move at your pace and use the name for the holy that fits your heart. This isn't therapy or advice. It's a meeting of souls, a place to listen deeply, ask real questions, and remember the wisdom already within you. I invite you now to take a breath. Let's begin. Today we're talking about exploitation, the kind that quietly takes your money, your body, your safety, and then tells you it's all for God. In the LDS Church, outside analysts now estimate that the institution is worth close to $300 billion, with over $200 billion sitting in investment reserves. A whistleblower from Ensign Peak told 60 Minutes that the church collects about $7 billion a year in tithing and has been funneling roughly $1 billion a year into that reserve fund since the late 1990s. At the same time, kids and teens have been taken into private rooms and asked sexually explicit questions by untrained bishops in the name of worthiness. And women in high control patriarchal marriages are told to work on the relationship even when there are clear danger signs like strangulation, which is something that domestic violence experts say is one of the strongest predictors of later homicide. But when you're inside it, none of it feels like exploitation. It feels like obedience, like faith, like your love of the gospel. This is episode 14 of the Reclaiming Your Sacred Freedoms series, Freedom from Exploitation, Economic, Sexual, and Physical. How high control religion trained you to hand over almost everything that mattered, and how you can begin to take it back. I'm Tamara Ridge. This is the Inner Light Companion podcast. Let's start with money. If you grew up LDS, you know the script. Pay 10% of your income to the church, and you're a full tithe payer. That's not just a nice label. It's the key to a temple recommend, which is the key to being sealed to your family forever. On paper, the church teaches self-reliance. There's even a manual called Personal Finances for Self-Reliance. But in that same curriculum, you're told to pay tithing and offerings before you pay other expenses, even necessities. General authorities have literally stood at the pulpit and said, pay tithing before rent, before food, before medical bills. So you have this strange mix. Be self-reliant, but give us 10% first, no matter what. Meanwhile, outside financial analysts estimate the church's net worth at around $293 billion, with about $206 billion of that in a massive investment portfolio. The whistleblower from Ensign Peak says $1 billion a year has gone into that fund, which now holds more than $100 billion. The SEC even fined the church and Ensign Peak $5 million for hiding the size of that portfolio behind shell companies. So let's be really honest here. When a religious institution with that level of wealth tells a single mom, a student, or a retiree on a fixed income to pay tithing before groceries, something is off. Now you might be thinking, but Tamara, there's the bishop's storehouse. The church does help people. First of all, have you been to the bishop's storehouse? There was a period of time in my life where I was paying tithing first. So I did have to, and even my father, who was on high council before he died, said, it's better for you to pay the church and rely on the church for your well-being than it is for you to be separate. So fine, I listened. I did the thing. I went to the bishop, to the storehouse, and none of that food is food that I would eat. It was all subpar. It wasn't good quality food. It was the basic, bottom of the barrel food that you can't expect to thrive and be healthy on. Refined foods, only white rice, bread, only white. The wheat bread was very refined. So yes, there's a bishop's storehouse. It's basically a church-run food pantry where members in need can receive groceries. But on top of the low quality, look at how the cycle often works. You're taught to pay tithing first, no matter what. That 10% means you come up short on rent or food. So you go to your bishop and explain your situation, and he decides whether you qualify for help from the subpar storehouse. The same man who judges your worthiness now also controls your access to basic necessities. That's not the same as a neutral community food bank. It's help that keeps you firmly inside the system with strings attached. And here's the question no one is allowed to ask in gospel doctrine class. If the church really wanted self-reliance, then why not let people keep the 10% they need to feed their kids and pay their rent instead of making them beg for food later? Because from a control perspective, dependency works. If you believe I can't feed my family without the church, and I can't be worthy without paying tithing, then money becomes a leash around your nervous system. Over time, your body learns to associate money with danger. If I don't pay, I might lose everything eternally. Shame. If I need help from the bishop, I've failed spiritually and financially. Powerlessness. I can't be trusted with my own resources. Someone else has to tell me what to do with them. Trauma-informed therapists who work with former high-control religion members see this all the time. People who are out of the church but still feel guilty spending money on themselves, or who panic around finances even when the numbers are okay. If that's you, nothing is wrong with you. Your body is responding exactly the way it was trained. Now let's talk about sex. Take a breath with me before we go here. In Mormon culture, worthiness interviews are routine. You sit down with your bishop or another male leader. He asks a series of questions to see if you're worthy for baptism, the sacrament, a mission, or the temple. For adults, that's already a power imbalance. But for kids and teens, it becomes something much more dangerous. Former Bishop Sam Young started gathering stories from members around the world under the banner Protect LDS Children. He eventually presented over 3,000 accounts describing bishops asking minors sexually explicit questions in closed-door interviews. We're talking questions like, do you masturbate? How often? Have you touched someone else sexually? Where? What exactly did you do? Now, let me tell you that Mormon bishops are not professionally trained. So in that environment where maybe you have a child who was sexually abused in another setting, not in the bishop's office behind closed doors, but by a family member or a family-like member, those children will do all of these things. Those children with that trauma will take personal responsibility for having been touched by someone else and say they did it and feel that it's their fault. But these adult men with no professional training in child development, sexuality, or trauma, having one-on-one closed-door conversations with children and teens about their most private experiences can actually amplify the trauma to that child. The Mormon Mental Health Association, made up of clinicians who understand both mental health and the LDS context, actually issued a formal position statement saying, this is not okay. They point out that sexual questioning tied to worthiness is developmentally inappropriate and harmful for minors. They're making that statement generally about children who have not been harmed by sexual abuse. But for those who have, it's going to be devastating. It violates recognized sexual rights frameworks like the World Association of Sexual Health. The behaviors being judged, like masturbation, are considered normatively healthy by mainstream medical and mental health organizations. So when a child or teen sits in that office, they're not on equal footing. They've been taught that this man speaks for God, that confessing everything is required for forgiveness, and that their eternal future may depend on how they answer. That's not consent. That's spiritual coercion. If we look at the victimsofcrime.org child sexual abuse statistics, we will see that 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 20 boys is a victim of child sexual abuse. So those children go into these worthiness interviews already pre-wired to feel wrong and unworthy and that things are their fault. And I can guarantee you that a non-trained bishop is going to make it worse. And then on top of that, there is the worst case scenario where bishops or leaders exploited this setup to groom and abuse children. So often when I'm talking about these religious freedoms, I get so angry, and here I am again. I did the research, I put the words together, but saying them out loud to you makes me so angry. Sam Young's project and multiple news stories have documented cases where leaders used their position, and especially one-on-one interviews, to cross boundaries or to commit outright abuse. The structure itself, a private room, an untrained adult male, unquestioned authority, sexual topics, creates the ideal cover for predators. When we call this spiritual sexual abuse, we're not being dramatic. We're naming the abuse of power, the misuse of spiritual authority, and the fusion of sexual shame with divine judgment. If your body still tenses at the thought of those interviews, If you feel sick remembering questions you were asked or answers you gave or things that happened to you in the dark that made you feel shame and then these interviews made you feel worse, that is your nervous system telling the truth. Take another breath. Now, let's move from sexuality to physical safety. Domestic violence experts have been sounding the alarm for years. Non-fatal strangulation is one of the strongest predictions of later homicide. Some studies suggest that if your partner has strangled you even once, you are 7.5 times more likely to be killed by them in the future. Now, in my work with women who've experienced domestic violence, I know that that's not a statement that a woman who's in an abusive situation can hear. I'm going to say it again. Some studies suggest that if your partner has strangled you even once, you're 7.5 times more likely to be killed by them in the future. Let's do some real talk here. My first marriage within the church, in the temple, was emotionally abusive. He never put his hands on me, but it was high control, absent emotions. And I believed it was my duty to God to become the kind of wife that this man could love, until I understood it wasn't. But it took a long, long time. Second marriage, married in the church, not in the temple. This man was a pillar in the community. Other women told me I would marry him in a hot second. Behind closed doors, he killed my animals. He abused my children. He even slammed my head in the trunk of a car. And I didn't immediately leave. I'm developing a 4-week online retreat called Awakening Your Inner Light, specifically for people coming out of high control religion who want to learn meditation, how to trust their intuition, and how to build direct connection with the divine. If you want to be on the early access list, email me at Tamara at innerlightcompanion.com. That's TAMARA at innerlightcompanion.com. Why? Well, let's place those dynamics inside a system where men hold priesthood authority. They're taught to preside in the home. I told you a story in a previous episode about that man who slammed my head in the trunk of a car saying, I'm your husband, you have to listen to me. And my answer was, I only have to listen to you if you listen to God, and you don't, so I don't have to listen to you. I was already on my way out. I was already recognizing that the rules and the structures and what I was supposed to be doing to be happy didn't work. So I wasn't going to fall for this idea that just because someone was my husband, they were allowed to abuse me. But inside that system, women are taught to support, submit, and save the marriage at almost any cost. I know, I was there. That's the doctrinal backdrop in Mormonism. Advocates and researchers have pointed out that in this kind of environment, women often go first to their bishop, not to a trained domestic violence advocate. And many bishops have no formal training in abuse dynamics, risk assessment, or safety planning. In fact, many of the bishops are probably abusive themselves. Some victims have reported being counseled to forgive, to work on the marriage, or consider the abuser's job and reputation before seeking legal protection. My third marriage was outside of the church, Mormon church, but I went and did that life confession to the Orthodox Christian priest where I was attending, and I blatantly told him about the sexual abuse that was occurring in that marriage, and he said, because this was my third marriage, God doesn't allow fourth marriages. Go back to your husband. I couldn't believe it. But that's the system. In at least one highly publicized Utah case, a woman who eventually died in a family annihilation had previously reported strangulation. That case was not categorized as high danger. That failure doesn't fall only on one person. It reveals a larger pattern of underestimating risk in religious and community systems. When your spiritual world says your husband holds the priesthood and your nervous system says, I'm not safe, it's no wonder people freeze. The part of you wired for survival and the part of you wired for loyalty are at war in that situation. And you might be thinking, okay, but how do I know if what I lived in was just imperfect humans or if the system itself is high control? That's a question I wrestled with all the time while I was still in my bad marriages. This is where Dr. Stephen Hassan comes in. He's a therapist and a cult expert who, as a young man, got recruited into the unification church called the Moonies and eventually escaped. Out of his experience and research, he developed something called the BITE model of authoritarian control. BITE stands for behavior control, information control, thought control, emotional control. It's a way of asking, does this group just influence me or does it own me? So let's connect a few dots. Behavior control. Pay 10% of your income, even before necessities. Follow strict sexual and clothing morality rules with enforcement through worthiness interviews. Obey leaders' counsel on marriage, divorce, and family decisions. Information control. Trust church-approved manuals, talks, and media. Distrust anti-Mormon or critical sources. Doubt your doubts. Most members had no idea about the scale of church investments until whistleblowers and the SEC forced some transparency. Thought control. Either it's true or it's a fraud. Black and white thinking leaves no space for nuance. Language like worthy or unworthy, clean or unclean, obedient or rebellious shapes how you think about yourself and how you think about others. Questioning leaders is framed as pride, doubt, apostasy, Satan's influence. And emotional control. Guilt and shame are used to enforce financial obedience, sexual purity, and endurance in marriage. Fear of losing your eternal family or community if you stop complying. People who leave are pitied, avoided, feared, or talked about, which is a softer form of shunning, although shunning does occur. When you see control happening, consistency across all four areas, you're not just looking at a strong culture. You're looking at an authoritarian system. You lived inside that system. Your nervous system did exactly what it needed to survive. So let's talk about what reclaiming can look like gently in real life with a real nervous system. Trauma clinicians who work with religious harm often talk about 3 layers of healing. Healing in your head, understanding what happened. In your heart, feeling and honoring your emotions about it. And in your body, helping your nervous system learn that it's safe now. We're going to touch each of these in 3 areas: money, sexuality, and safety. So money, financial sovereignty. That happens when in your head you named what happened. So set aside a little time and as best you can, estimate how long you paid tithing, roughly how much you paid per year, And look at the big sacrifices you made because God needed the money. Did you sacrifice medical care? Did you delay? Did you take debt on? Did you miss opportunities? Seeing those numbers on paper is not about beating yourself up. It's about saying, I was told this was required. I wasn't making free choices. I was responding to pressure. Remember, you were functioning in a system where a whistleblower now says $100 billion plus was growing quietly in the background while you were told to sacrifice more. In your heart, let your feelings be real. You might feel angry, foolish, sad, or just numb. All of that is welcome. Therapists who specialize in religious trauma see these exact reactions as healthy signs that your system is beginning to tell the truth. You did the best you could with the information you had and the conditioning you were under. Now for a body practice to help you develop safety around money. Right now, place a hand over your heart. Take a slow breath in and an even slower breath out. Then say out loud if you can, I am allowed to keep what I earn. Notice what your body does. Does your chest tighten? Does your stomach flip? Just notice. That's old wiring. Your job isn't to argue with it. Your job is to breathe and let your body know we're allowed to have resources now. Financial planners who work with former high control religion members often recommend a small sovereignty account, even $10 or $20 that you set aside that belongs only to you. No guilt, no sacrifice, no spiritual strings. Now let's talk about sexuality, where your body is not a worthiness project. So in your head, you want to call it what it was. If a religious leader asked you explicit questions tied to your worthiness, especially when you were a minor, that was not normal pastoral care. Clinical organizations like the Mormon Mental Health Association consider that harmful and a violation of basic sexual rights. Naming it as spiritual sexual abuse or spiritual sexual coercion aligns your story with what experts are already saying, not just what your body has been whispering. So in your heart, I want you to realize that your reactions make sense. Maybe you feel disgusted when you think about your bishop's office. Maybe you still feel dirty or broken. Maybe you shut down sexually or have a hard time trusting your partners now. You are not broken. Those responses make sense when your earliest sexual experiences were tied to shame, interrogation, and fear of God's anger. So for your body, this is a small coming home practice. If it feels okay, just try this very simple practice. Sit or stand somewhere where you feel relatively safe. Place one hand on your heart and one on your belly and take a slow breath in and out. Then say out loud if you can, this body is mine. My sexuality is mine. You don't have to believe it 100% yet. You're just introducing a new message to a body that's heard you are dirty, you are dangerous, you must confess for a very long time. Now let's look at safety, because leaving is sacred. In your head, you need to understand the risk clearly. If your partner has strangled you even once, research shows your risk of being killed by that partner goes up dramatically. That's not a spiritual issue. That's a safety issue. When a bishop with no domestic violence training tells you to work on your marriage or forgive and move forward, he is speaking outside his lane. He might be sincere, but he's not equipped. So in your heart, I know that some fear might come up, but I want you to give yourself permission. If you've left an abusive relationship and you still hear old voices saying you broke your covenants, you are allowed to answer back now. No, I honored my life. I honored my children's safety. That is sacred. Many faith-based domestic violence resources and theologians are now very clear. Staying in a relationship that endangers your life is not what a loving God requires. So now let's look at your body and offer it a safety signal. So if it feels okay, try this. Place your hand on the back of your neck, the place that often feels tight when you feel watched or threatened. Before we continue, I want to name something. I've been creating a small space called Grace's World because I believe spirituality belongs with humanness, not above it. Grace's World isn't teaching or advice. It's just ordinary moments, mugs filled with hot drinks, mornings, feelings that don't need fixing. If that sounds like something you'd like to sit with, you're welcome to visit. Just go to innerlightcompanion.com/Grace's World. And if you don't want to visit, that's completely okay. Let's continue. Breathe in for a count of 4. Out for a count of 6. Then say quietly, my safety is sacred. I am allowed to protect myself. If you are currently in danger, if you've ever been strangled by your current partner, even if you think that's okay and you caused it, there's nothing you can do, and this is what I say to my clients, there's nothing you can do to make a non-violent man harm you. And there's nothing you can do to stop a violent man from harming you. So even in this moment, if you're in a relationship with someone who has done things to harm you physically, that's not an accident. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-SAFE, SAFE. 1-800-799-7233. They can help you talk through the next steps with someone that's trained in safety planning. The most dangerous time in a violent relationship is right after leaving. So please don't think that you can just leave the relationship and be okay. You must do safety planning if there's been any physical violence at all. Then the fourth thing we want to talk about is reclaiming your inner authority. Authoritarian religion trains you to believe that someone else always knows better. Leaders know better than your doubts. The manual knows better than your body. The prophet knows better than your inner knowing. Part of healing is slowly shifting from external authority to inner authority. So here's a simple journaling practice you can try for a week. Each day, write this question at the top of the page. What do I know deep down that I've been afraid to trust? Don't edit. Don't judge. Just let the answers come. Over time, that question becomes a bridge back to your own direct line to the divine. The next area is the spiritual reframe, because you need to understand who God is not. The more we learn about religious abuse, the clearer one thing becomes. Any God who requires your exploitation is a false image of God. A God who needs your last 10% while $100 billion plus fund grows in secret is not the God you're coming to know now. A God who needs you to describe your masturbation habits to an untrained man is not the God who meets you in the quiet of your own heart. A God who insists you stay with someone who strangles or terrorizes you is not the God of life and protection rising up in your nervous system right now. The divine does not exploit you. Whatever name you use, God, the divine, love, the beloved, the real thing does not need you poor, ashamed, or unsafe in order to be pleased with you. When you put all of this together, the finances, the worthiness interviews, the patriarchal structures, the bite model, it becomes very hard to keep calling this just how the church is. It looks much more like a system of extraction, of money, of sexual privacy, of safety, of inner authority. If you recognize yourself in this, hear this clearly. You were not gullible. You were not weak. You were surviving inside a high control system that wrapped exploitation in spiritual language. Now you have words. You have data. You have a body that's starting to say, no more. Your money is yours. Your body is yours. Your safety is yours. Your spiritual authority is yours. The divine has never needed your exploitation. You were always worthy. You were always loved. You were always meant to be free. Welcome back to yourself. If this stirred something in you, I'd love to hear what landed. Send me an email at tamara@innerlightcompanion.com. I read and respond to every message. If you want to go deeper, take the Sacred Intimacy Snapshot at innerlightcompanion.com to see which of the 12 sacred intimacies might be your most natural doorway back into connection with the divine. Next Tuesday, we get to talk about the second sacred intimacy. I'm excited about it because the 12 sacred intimacies are so much fun and so enlightening and empowering. I'm so grateful that I've been able to provide these 14 sacred freedoms that get stolen so that you can name what happened so that you can start your healing process. But next week, we start with communication intimacy with the divine. It will be a 4-week study, and then once a month, we'll go back to studying the teachings of the masters. Until then, keep listening to your body, keep trusting what you know, keep reclaiming what was always yours. You're not alone in this. Thanks for listening. As you step into your day, notice which intimacies stirred for you, and then choose one small practice and let it meet you where you are. You want support? Grab the free Sacred Intimacy Snapshot, and when you're ready, the full Sacred Intimacy Assessment that can guide your next steps. Links are in the show notes. Until next time, walk gently, listen deeply, and trust the light within.